Make sure we're recording. Okay, we're recording. That's my biggest fear is that I forget to record. Usually I put a big Post-it on my computer to remember. So we are going live. People will see both of us now, but once you start talking, I will turn my camera off. So here we go.
Oh, great. Ready. I'm excited.
3, 2, 1. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. This is Jeff Agron, Director of Operations for the Mussar Institute. Welcome to our free webinar series for 2017 on Pirke Avot, Explorations in Root Principles. I want to just say a little bit about this program. We have 6 webinars. We have had our first 2, and our third one, Pirke Avot Chapter 3 with Rivy Kletenik, who is coming to you live this morning from Seattle, Washington. And today's topic, being on Chapter 3 of Pirke Avot, is subtitled Implications of Being Created in the Image, the Mussar Trait of Honor. And as you saw from the information that went out, the promotional material that went out, we're going to be dealing with Chapter 3. It says Mishnah 18, and explore the nuances of the ideas of being created in the image of the Almighty. What are the implications to students of Mussar? How does the idea help us to frame our practices around honor and strengthen our commitment to the other? So, we have a brief guest appearing on screen. So let me just introduce to you Rivy Kletenik. She is a Covenant Award winner. She's in her, I believe, 11th or 12th year as head of school of the Seattle Hebrew Academy. She's taught several longstanding weekly classes to the community, including a women's Talmud class, now in its 23rd year. Her column, What's Your JQ, appears in the JT News and now runs in the new Jewish in Seattle magazine. On the national level, Rivy's articles have been featured in the JOFA Journal, Lilith Magazine, New York Jewish Week, and Tablet. She's enjoyed traveling across the country as a popular scholar in residence, a Lamud presenter, and teacher of Mussar. Rivy is married to Rabbi Moshe Kletenik and is the proud mother of 4 children and 7 very impressive grandchildren. So, very impressive. So that's wonderful. So Rivy has taught for us at the Mussar Institute. I believe she was at a Kala one year teaching for us several years ago. So some of you may remember her from there. So I would like to, I'm going to welcome Rivy, but before I do that, I just want to mention that this webinar is being recorded, and I'd like to thank Elizabeth Eastman, who has been the producer of the webinar series this year. She took over from Dahlia Brill, who had produced it for several years before and did a great job, and Elizabeth has filled in and done an excellent job in her own right, producing this series, which will continue next month. I want to mention a few things about the technology side of this. There is, at the bottom of your screen, you will see question and answer box. In the question and answer box, there will be opportunities either throughout the webinar for you to type in questions, and Rivy will do her best to answer them either in real time or save them towards the end. And we'll also leave some time at the end for you to put in questions. It might be helpful right now if a few people want to just type something into the question and answer box so that we know that you're there. There's also a chat box, but I think it's easier to use the question and answer box. I see a whole bunch of people on, including Henry and Marga, who are all the way in Europe, in Holland, so we are spanning many time zones. Jeff Ammer, I think, is on. Elizabeth is on. Some people just have first names, so I'm not sure exactly who they are. I see Marie in Jamaica is on. It's like the Weinbergers in Chicago are on, and so we have, thank you for typing things in the box from Elizabeth in Palo Alto, that's Elizabeth Easton, Jeff Ammer, Ziona in Los Angeles, Esha and Chesky in Long Island, the Weinbergers in Buffalo Grove, Chicago, and people, terrific, I see people all over the world. So this is wonderful, spanning the entire globe. So thank you for putting in your questions. Just to let you know, as I said, this is being recorded, so for those who are watching live and for those who are not watching live, a link will be sent out by tomorrow morning with the recording. This will also be put on our YouTube channel, as are all of our webinars, and it's there for the world to see. It's free, and please share it with your friends and students and Havruta and everybody that you know, and let them know. I'll be sending out a link, and you can see all of our webinars on YouTube. So I think that's about it for all the housekeeping and announcements, and I am going to stop talking and turn my camera off, so all you see is Rivy. And as I said, please feel free to put in your questions into the Q&A box. Rivy?
Yep.
You look like you're ready to go, so
Ready.
turn it over to you for some good teaching this morning.
Thank you, Jeff, so much. I so appreciate it. You've been very kind and you're shepherding us through this process, so thank you. And I'm just real quick, so for me to see the questions, I click on the Q&A?
Yes, you would click on the Q&A and a box will pop up, and right now there's 10 in there. Those are all the welcome things, so if you see it there, that means you have questions.
Great.
And if you don't see them, I'll pipe in and just
oh, perfect.
Heads up.
Great. Yeah, if you keep an eye on them, and you can also interrupt me, it's fine. All right, friends, good morning. And at least in Seattle, it is a good morning. And it is lovely to be together with you. And I am looking forward to our learning together. In this Pirke Avot series, in line with the fact that it's a Pirke Avot series, we're going to begin with the reading of the specific Mishnah teaching from which our learning will emanate this morning. And I'm going to call your attention to chapter 3 in Pirkei Avot, Mishnah number 18. There are different versions of Pirkei Avot, and in some places this Mishnah might be a little earlier or a little later. It is in a string of Mishnayot teachings that come from the great sage Rabbi Akiva. And so Mishnah 18 begins, Hu haya omer, he was wont to say. A note, Pirkei Avot does not simply gather together sayings, it gathers together sayings which are indicative of who the sage was. This is something that Rabbi Akiva did not just say once, but that this was one of his famous quotes. Part of the making of who Rabbi Akiva is that this was a central teaching of his. Hu haya omer, he was wont to say, Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem. Precious is the human being, beloved is the human being, shenivra b'tzelem, because the human being was created in the image of God. Chiba yitera nodat lo. Not only was it indicative that human being is beloved because they were created in the image, but there is an additional love. Chiba yitera, an additional love was bestowed on the human being when they were made known of this. Shenivra b'tzelem. It is not a mystery. It wasn't something that we humans had to discover, but rather God told us that we were created in the image. It is part of our deep beliefs. It is part of our animating ethos that the human being is created in the image of God. How do we know this? Rabbi Akiva's teaching continues. Shene'emar, as it is said, Ki b'tselem Elokim asa et ha'adam, because God Almighty created the human being in his image. Now it's very interesting, just as we simply begin with this Mishnah, is to notice the proof text. Where is that proof text from? I am sure we are all going to the creation narrative. Oh yeah, doesn't God talk about, doesn't the Torah, doesn't the book of Bereshit, Genesis, talk about that human beings were created in the image of God when human beings were created? Yes, it does. It absolutely does. But what is interesting is that Rabbi Akiva does not choose one of those verses. Rabbi Akiva chooses a verse from later on, from the Parshat Noach, from the aftermath of the flood. In the aftermath of the flood, God instructs the human being about the laws of murder and says that if you murder someone, shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam, damo yishafech, anyone who kills another person is liable to be, the punishment for that would be as severe as the taking of one's own life. Meaning if you murder someone, you're culpable. It's a capital offense. Why? Ki b'tselem Elokim asat adam. Because God created the human being in the image of God. Now this is startling that Rabbi Akiva chooses this citation about being created in the image, this quote from the end of the Torah portion about Noah, rather than other verses from the creation narrative. So let's pause first and remind ourselves. This section of the Torah is the one after the creation narrative. We're in chapter 9 here in Genesis, not chapter 1 or 2, where the other verses are. And this is after the flood has happened. Noah has come out from the ark alive. God now instructs Noah with several commandments. And one of them is, do not murder. Why do you not murder? Because every human being was created in the image of God. Now let's hold on to that, put that over here. So Rabbi Akiva, in teaching that human beings are created in the image, chooses the verse in Noah, which is connected to the prohibition of murder. Now, let's go back for a minute. Let's pause. Where do we first hear about this notion of being created in the image of God? Well, those verses are earlier, and they are part of the creation narrative. We see when we open up the book of Bereshit, chapter 1, the very first chapter in our Torah, in verse 25, we learn that God has created all of the animals. Of course, this is already after day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're now in day 6. And then God says, Vayomer Elokim na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu. At the very first moment of the introduction of the creation of human, after the world has been created, the water has been separated, the trees, the birds, the creepy crawlers, when it comes time to create the human being, God speaks of it. There's intentionality. Vayomer Elokim na'aseh Adam. Let us make the human being. Of course, the Midrash speaks that God is talking to the angels. It's a very beautiful idea here that God is including in this project, the committee. Vayomer Elokim na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu. Let us make human being. And what's the first word? B'tzalmenu, in our image. Kidmutenu, in our likeness. And then it goes on to say the next pasuk, verse 27, Vayivra Elokim et ha'adam b'tzalmo. God created the human being in his image. And if you didn't get it yet, B'tselem Elokim bara oto. God created the human being in his image. Zacharu nekeva bara otam. They were created male and female. In chapter 2, in the recap of creation, again, we hear the idea that God created the human being in God's image. Vayitzar Hashem Elokim et Adam afar min Adamah. God, not exactly the image, but a next step in a very important piece that we're going to connect. And it says, Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim. God fashioned the human being from the earth and then blew into his nostrils, into the nostrils of the human being, the breath of God. So let's pause here and consider these three different places where we hear about the creation of the human being. The first one is God creates the human being, and right away we have an idea of in the image. Then in this recap of the creation narrative in chapter 2, where we learn about the separation of Adam from Eve, of man from woman, we then learn how God created the human being from the earth, and then Vayipach ba'apav, the blowing into the nostrils of Nishmat Chayim, the soul of life. Then, the final verse that connects with the image of God is in the Parshat Noach, in the Noach narrative, in the aftermath of the flood. So let's pause here and think about this. What are we learning here? We're learning that the human being was created in the image of God. We then see that the human being, as if, is made of two parts. The earthly part, the afar mina adama, the physical part, which is from the earth, and then this soul, that's Seattle conservationist, the soul that is blown through the nostrils of the human being. Okay? And we are going to be exploring very soon this notion of what is the image of God and its connection to the soul. We'll do that in a moment. Let's, though, return to this first question. Why does Rabbi Akiva select the passage in the aftermath of Noah with a connection to the commandment to not murder as the verse, the proof text that we are created in the image? It's actually quite startling. If you were Rabbi Akiva, or if I wanted to write a Mishnah like this, why would I not go to the first creation narrative verses, which, by the way, have the word tselem, image, in it many times? Na'aseh Adam b'tzelmeinu, let us create human being in our likeness. And then in the next verse, God created the human being in his image, and then repeats it in case you hadn't missed it, b'tzelem. Why does Rabbi Akiva instead pick the verse from Noah? And so, the first thought that I have concerning this is perhaps along the medical oath lines of first do no harm. Meaning, we humans must have deeply ingrained into ourselves that we are created in the image. But it's not just I'm created in the image, all other people are created in the image. And first, do no harm. First obligation is to not cause any harm to any other human being. And so Rabbi Akiva is telling us this when he says that, hey, remember, you are created, you are precious, you were created in the image of God, and then quotes, do not murder. The one who murders another human is liable, because every human is created in the image of God. Now, on one hand, you might think, really? Why did Rabbi Akiva do that? Why don't we hear about the deep, moving, profound ideas of creation. Why not read that beautiful verse about the soul of the human being? Why is Rabbi Akiva talking first about don't murder? And I think that this is a really very important point. We can be very lofty, and we can begin to think about all of the wonderful things we're going to do to other people. But let us also first think, let me not harm another person. Let's do that, and then let's build on that. I think that's the powerful message of Rabbi Akiva. Now let's go back over here. We have more to say about Rabbi Akiva, but we'll come back to Rabbi Akiva and who he was and why this is a teaching of his. And let's go, though, on this stream over here for a minute to talk about what does this possibly mean that I, a human, am created in the image of God. Now, of course, first up is, it's really, how do you get created in the image of God, a God who has, by the way, no image? How does that happen? So what does this possibly mean that we are created in the image of God? And why use a word of image when we know there is no image of God? Why continuously refer to Tzelem Elokim and the notion of being created in the image about a God whose first commandment, I am the Lord your God, whose second commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me, not any image, not any picture, not above, not below. So we are told many times, God does not have an image. This is a huge idea, of course, of our Torah. It is an issue that comes up so often in the early era of the ancient Israelites, where they are surrounded by people who are worshiping images. The ancient Near East is a place of gods of images. So why then does our Torah use the word image to say we're created in the image of God, a God who has no image? And so our verse in the second chapter addresses that. The image of God is that it is ethereal, is that it is a spirit, nefesh chaya. It is the soul of the human that is the image, so to speak, of God. Now, let's pause to reflect on this. This is a big idea in Judaism, a big idea of the Torah. Other peoples in the ancient Near East and other places around the globe, ironically, build idols in the image of humans. Our Torah says, no. Humans are created in the image of God. And that image is no image. That image is the soul. Chelek Eloka Mima'al. The book of Eov talks of the peace of God from on high. That is the soul that is inside each one of us. Chelek Eloka Mima'al. The image of God that we are created in is this notion of a soul. And we are going to together explore this idea of soul in one moment. We're going to get to that. But first, let's talk a little bit about Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva, as you all know, did not grow up with Torah, but rather became a person of Torah when he was much older, when he was 40 years old. And Rabbi Akiva is famously known for saying, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, zehu klal gadol b'Torah, that the greatest principle of Torah is you shall love your fellow human being as yourself. We can see how this is a mantra of Rabbi Akiva. This notion of caring for the other, this notion of caring for the other as you would care for yourself, is very much a Rabbi Akiva idea, an idea that Rabbi Akiva put forth as the preeminent idea. And here in our Mishnah, he says, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem. We are precious to God for having been created in the image of God, and God told us about it in these texts. So now let us talk for a moment about how other commentators understand this notion of the human being. So as we followed in creation, many things were created. Then suddenly there was a departure. Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu. God says, let us create the human. It wasn't the casual creation that had occurred before. And I don't mean to give short shrift to the creation of the world, but other creations they simply flowed. There was day 1, day 2, day 3. And by the way, after each creation, it said, the Torah says, God saw that it was good. God saw it, it was good. And very interestingly, about the creation of the human being, God has an observation later, which says, Lo tov heyot Adam livado. It is not good that human being is alone. And that is in Bereshit chapter 2, and it prefaces the narrative of the creation of the woman in verse 18. Now, this is very interesting. The creation of the human being is noteworthy, of course. You know, this is the whole of creation is aiming to this point. Yes, we are anthrocentric. We are a people that sees humans as the center of creation. First, God says, let's create human. That's different. And then the next deviation from the pattern of creation is lo tov. It is not good that humans are alone. Now, this is very, very interesting. All along, all of the creation has been good. It's been very good. But then God reflects on the human being that God had created in the image of God himself. And then God says, Lo tov heyot Adam levado. It is not good for the human to be alone. And then the human being is separated and community is born. There is a man and a woman, and Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about this is the story of community, of one human being and another. And this, my friends, loops right back to Rabbi Akiva's subtle point when he quotes in the Mishnah, why is human beings are created in the image, they are precious, and then quotes the verse about the prohibition of murder. Because at the beginning of the creation of human is the first idea of it is not good for the human to be alone. The human needs community, and yet in that community are the seeds of strife. In that very community is the potential for the murder of the human being, for the dissolution of society, for the people, for all of the foibles of getting along with human beings. And there we hear that God says it's not good. Let's create the human being. Let us have this human being who's created in the image of God. But this human being is not alone. This human being is part of society. And now we come into the great message of Mussar, of Mussar. And Mussar seeks to address the conflict. Mussar seeks to help us navigate Mussar seeks to help us navigate the relationship between each other. And we are going to, in a moment, turn the conversation to the implications in our Mussar world of this teaching of Rabbi Akiva. But before we get to that, let's just explore a little bit more about what does it mean to have a soul, or as Alan Marinos would say, to be a soul. What does it mean to be a soul? What does it mean to be created in the image of God? And what does it mean in comparison to other creations? Okay, so There are many commentaries on this Mishnah in Pirke Avot, and there's so many different interesting pieces to what does this mean to be a human being created in the image. And I'm sure you're already thinking, in what way is the human being similar to God? There is a notion of intelligence, creation, mercy. God is merciful. We are merciful. We are innovators. We are creators. We have free choice. There's a divine aura, perhaps, around us. We have the capability of change. We have the capability of believing. We have the capability of sacrificing for belief. We have the capability of purpose and self-worth. The idea of being created in the image and having a soul is also about a deep feeling of self-esteem. When Rabbi Akiva says human beings are precious because they are created in the image of God, Rabbi Twersky, in his commentary on this Mishnah, talks about the notion and the deep importance of self-esteem. That God is telling us, human being, you are precious. You are created in the very image of God. Rabbi Twersky says in many different places that although he wrote many books, they're all about self-esteem. The notion of self-worth, the notion of feeling, I have an importance. There is nothing more critical to the human being's self-worth than to know that the human was created in the image of God. That we are just barely below angels. That we, in fact, are not only created in the image of God, but we are God's representatives down here on earth. We are the arms, so to speak, of God. We are God taking action in this world. We are created in the image of God, and Rabbi Twersky writes, we are capable of sacrificing ourselves for grand ideals. We are capable of standing up for what we believe in. We are capable of knowing the why. Hold on, get the light back on. Let's pursue this a little bit. Two directions. The first one is a story that Rabbi Twersky talks about a prince who behaved inappropriately, and he is sent into exile. And there he is with all the shepherds, and he doesn't know what to do. He's grown up in the palace. He doesn't know how to take care of himself. The sun is hot. He is all by him. He sees other people building for themselves a thatched little sukkah, a little place that he can live in. He doesn't even know how to do that. He doesn't know how to take care of himself. And then the word comes out. The king is coming to town. He's in a big fancy coach, in a carriage. And you can write down a request and throw it to the king. And if it lands on the coach, then maybe the king will grant your wish. And so this poor shepherd, the former prince, writes on, I would like a thatched roof, hat. I would like a sukkah. He throws it on the coach, and the king picks it up, and he sees the prince, and he turns to the prince. He goes, you're a prince. I'm the king. You are my son. And this is the only thing you're asking for? Why don't you ask to return to the palace? Why don't you ask to be the prince again? Why don't you ask for all of the things that you deserve? We are created in the image of God. And as such, we each are to be created. We are each to be treated as an entity that has chelek eloka mimal, a piece of God on high. We are to be treated that way, self-esteem, and it is our obligation to treat others that way. There's a beautiful, beautiful midrash, sip of water. There's a beautiful midrash that says that there's a band of angels that marches in front of every person. And the band of angels is like a fanfare. Dun, 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 dun. Here comes the image of God. Here comes, make way, make way. Here comes the image of God. Each of us, human beings here on earth, we are created in the image of God. We are to think of ourselves that way. And we are to treat every human being with kavod, with honor. Kavod habriot. There is a deep, important notion in Judaism that is referred to as kavod habriot, the honor of all creations. Of course, part of a reflection of the Mussar trait of kavod. And we will get to that in one moment. Let's get back to this idea of the idea, the fact that we have a soul. And what we're saying here, friends, is that the soul is the piece of God from on high. In fact, the soul, which has no image, it is a spirit, that is the image of God. And to recap, God creates us in the image of God, God who has no image, God who is spirit on high, endows each of us with the spirit from on high, with a soul. And because of this, we are to remember this. We are precious to God. And we are to remember this in regards to how we treat others. Do not murder. Rabbi Akiva selects that passage as his proof text. And that is the way we are to treat ourselves. We are people of to be a people of dignity, to be people who expect to be treated with kavod by others. Okay, now let us...
Rivy, this is Jeff. There was one question that I'll put out there.
Sure.
From Ken. He asked as follows: did God make human beings in the image, and because he recognized that it was not good for God to be alone, so he made us, since it was not good for us in his image to be alone?
Aha, okay, so again, now that's interesting. Okay, so Ken, let's go with that for a minute. So the question was, it says, Lo tov heyot adam levado. It is not good for a human being to be alone. And therefore, God separated and created male and female. But it seems to me that what you're saying here is maybe it wasn't good for God to be alone and therefore created the human being, which might be a lovely way of looking at this verse. But more than that, it is exactly what the purpose of the creation of the world was, and that is that we human beings are the agents of God here on earth. Now, let me take a few minutes to explore this, and I hope that this will address your question. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent and come back. There is an idea that sometimes God hides his face from us. So even though this whole world is full of God, and we can see God in so many different ways, there is a very painful idea in the Torah that as a result of human behavior, there's a notion of hester panim, of the hiddenness of God. Now I'm going to remind you, before we delve into this notion of the hiddenness of God, there is a notion that is also woven through the Torah, which is that God created a world and made room for the human being, but then the human being ate of the tree. And in that narrative, it says, Kol Elohim mitalech bagan, the voice of God leaving the garden. According to Rabbi Soloveitchik, that is the idea that when the human being ate of the tree, it was a huge fissure, break between God and the human. God has provided with this human being with an entire world, everything, but don't eat of this tree. And the human being does that terrible act and eats of the tree. And then God, mitalech bagan, God as if leaves the garden. God returns to earth at Sinai in covenant with the people Israel, in covenant with the people who will observe the Torah, who will be the moral and ethical people on mission in this world. And then the people, not unlike the garden, create the golden calf. And God leaves. God says to the people, I am not going to take you into the land of Israel. The angel, you follow the angel. And the people are devastated. They take off the finery off from their bodies. They go into mourning. They can't believe what they've done. But then God gives them a commandment. Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Create for me a tabernacle, and I will dwell in you. And the Hasidic teaching is that God has a stature in each person, the soul, the image of God in each of us, is koma lashchina. God's stature in this world is the soul in each one of us and our actions. And let's go back to this scary notion of hester panim. What does it mean God hides himself? That is usually referred to at a time of terrible, terrible things. Most usually in reference to the Shoah, to the Holocaust. Where was God? Where was God? Is the question that theologians, philosophers, human beings who survived ask, where was God? One response is, hester panim. This is a time of the hiddenness of God. How could it be that God hides? The way that notion makes sense to me is the soul of all of the humans. We are koma lashchina. We are God's presence here on earth. And all of those people who chose not to see, all of those people who hid their faces and didn't see the trains and didn't see the ghettos and didn't see all of the actions that began in 1933. There was a hiddenness of God. So God does not want to be alone in this world. God has created human beings to be God's agents here on earth. Koma lashchina, the Hasidic sages say. God's stature on this earth. Because we are here to bring the godliness into this world. Two, as Rabbi Akiva says, we are precious. And then quotes, don't murder. The verse says, Shofer dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishavech ki b'tselem Elokim asat ha'adam. You humans are created in the image of God. Do not murder. So when the human being who's created in the image of God has the responsibility to be God's agent here on earth, and they hide their face from what is happening, that is hester panim. That is the hiddenness of God here on earth. And it was very interesting. As much as we talk about the Shoah, there is always so much more to say. There was a very moving article in yesterday's New York Times, and that would be March 24th. A German woman writing about her own grandparents, asking her grandmother, why did you not see? How could you not have seen? Why did you not do anything? And the article is, yes, my grandparents were Nazis. It's a very painful chapter in the history of humankind. And it is a failure, a total failure of Kavod Habriot, the honor of the creations. What does it mean, this notion of soul? I threw out a few ideas. It means we can walk. It means that we have a divine aura, intelligence, creativity, wisdom, innovation, free choice, mercy, purpose of life, capacity to change, the idea of the being able to sacrifice for belief, the idea to know and to ask the question, why am I here? Well, that question too is connected to this idea of the honor of the human being. If I were to say to each of you, soul, that's so hard to grasp. What does it mean, a soul? Can I see a soul? Have you ever seen a soul? Where do you look for the soul? I'm sure you've heard the expression that when you look into someone's eyes, you can see their soul. And there's a very moving verse when Jacob is reuniting with Esav. They're making up. As you recall, Jacob conspired and purchased the birthright in a very harsh way when he said, I'll give you a bowl of soup for the birthright. Sell for me this day the birthright. And then, as you recall, he goes in and he receives the blessing from his father when he pretends to be his brother Esav. And Esav, his brother Esau, is so angry. And he says, I'm going to kill him. By the way, killing. I am going to kill him. And then Jacob himself falls victim to the similar kinds of things that had happened to him. He took advantage of his father who could not see, and he took the blessing that was meant for his brother. He, later on, as you recall, is tricked. And instead of marrying his beloved Rachel, he is married to Leah. He was tricked by his father-in-law. He wanted to be the firstborn. Well, he ended up being married to the firstborn because we don't give away the younger daughter. But when the two of them make up, meaning Jacob wrestles all night with his conscience. He wrestles all night with the memory of what he did to his brother. And then when he meets up with him, his brother, he says, Al kain ra'ot panecha kirot Elokim. When I look at your face, when I look at you, it is like seeing God. When you look at a person in their face, when you look at the face of another human, and you look into their eyes, you see the divine. Al kain ra'ot panecha kirot Elokim. When I see your face, I see God. This, friends, is the key to ideas of social justice. When we see the image of God in the other, then we are moved to treat them the way we would want to be treated. And then, of course, Jacob says, Kach na'at birchati, take my blessing. He realizes what he has done wrong. And so this idea of Rabbi Akiva, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem, every human is precious because they were created in the image of God. And then he quotes for us the proof text that you shall not murder, given to Noah after the flood. That's a huge message. What is going to keep us from harming the other, from doing the most heinous? Everyone is created in the image of God. Let's start there. Then, of course, it is upon you and I to then build. And then to deeply think, what does it mean to honor another human being? What does it mean? How does it motivate me in the way that I talk to the barista? What does it motivate me in the way that I talk to the person who's putting gas in my car? What does it mean before I turn to a friend to share a juicy nugget of lashon hara, of gossip? What does it mean when I see another person's child, and I treat them like my child? The notion of honor emanates out from this deep idea that you and I, we are all created in the image of God. We share a soul. We share a piece of God on high. We share a piece of the neshama kilalit, of the soul that is shared by all human beings. That is what it is when we think of being created in the image of God. Now, let's pause and recap. And Jeff, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to think about them now together with everyone. So let's just see where we've gone. We began with the teaching of Pirke Avot of Rabbi Akiva. We reminded ourselves of who Rabbi Akiva was. He also said, you must love your fellow as yourself. We went back to the creation narrative and we saw what it means that the human being was created in the image of God, that God breathed into the human being the soul. What does it mean to have a soul? It means to be koma lashchina, to be God's agents here on earth, to have a piece of God from on high. And this idea of, on one hand, kavod for oneself, self-esteem, and on the other hand, kavod, habriot, honor for all human beings. And when we take a look in Alan's book, I think it's Mirror Image, Everyday Holiness, the chapter on honor brings out a number of these different issues. And I lost my place, but I will find it. One of the points that is made by Alan in the book, in the chapter Honor, page 107. Thank you, Self. It's really interesting that Alan begins with, Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students. All of them died the 32 days before Passover and Shavuot because lo nahagu kavod zeh bazeh, because they did not give honor. I'm noticing a pattern with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says every single human being is precious because they were created in image. And sadly, his students do not uphold this honor. And it is deeply, deeply sad that his mantra was all about the honor, and yet it was where his students had failed. And it is very interesting to see actually that Alan pulls together the chapter on page 114 with the teaching of beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God, our Mishnah. And it's a lesson that we have to really have in front of us at all times. It is the lens through which we see every human being. Every human being is a soul. And it is a huge challenge to have this teaching part of our daily practice, of to look at every human being and see them deeply as a soul, as a piece of God from on high, created in the image. And of course, it should hold us back, serve as a deterrent from us mistreating a human. But we also have to take the next step in seeing, and how do we honor every human being? How do we honor our friends, our parents, our children, our students? So, Jeff, are there questions that I might address at this point?
Okay, well, thank you. That was wonderful, and very wonderful, passionate, engaging talk this morning. So if we have about 6-7 minutes left to pose any questions, and Rivy would be happy to do her best to answer them in the time allotted. So if anybody has a question, would like to post it in the question and answer section. about this topic or anything related to this topic, now would be the time. So go ahead. We'll give that a few moments for people to type things in.
As people are doing that, I'm really very happy to also move a little bit further about this notion of the soul.
Sure. Why don't you go ahead and do that?
Okay. Yeah. And if you can just raise your hand and let me know if there's a question.
Okay.
When we talk about this soul, there's also an element of how do we grow our soul? And what makes, we've heard people say, what a beautiful soul, what a pure soul. And, what does this entail? And there's a beautiful teaching, a midrash, that Aviva Zornberg explores. This idea of why did Abraham have to be told to leave his place? And as you recall, Abraham is considered the founder or the first of our people. And why did he have to lech lecha? Why did he have to go? Travel is so hard. It can be fun, I get that, cruises, but the kind of travel that was Abraham, where Abraham had to leave his comfort zone, his home. And so the Midrash talks about how Abraham was like a bottle of perfume. And when the perfume has the lid on it, it's contained. Now, how do you smell that perfume? Okay, you remove the lid, but there's also agitation. When there's agitation to the soul, the perfume comes out from the bottle. And this is the soul. We are here on earth not to simply have an easy time. We are here on earth to get out of our comfort zone. And it is only through, sadly, sometimes struggle, agitation, that our souls grow. And it is a very hard piece of our life here on earth. And I want to work together with you in these last few moments to connect this idea of the soul and the agitation of the soul, and the idea that though we are blessed with this soul, this does not mean that this is all so easy and simple. And I think that the confluence of the mandate that we must honor everyone, and everyone is endowed with a soul, is part of that discomfort. When we walk through life, it cannot just be what is working for me and what is so wonderful for me. It is also, I am struggling and you are struggling, and this actually is our humanity. And what does it mean to perhaps reach out to the fellow human being and to recognize that none of us are having this wonderful time here on earth, this magical experience. Not always, sometimes, but not always. And that is also part of the recognition of the honoring. Sometimes we look out on people and we say, oh my gosh, everybody is having a wonderful time. This one's got the perfect spouse. This one's got the most beautiful house. This one's children all are doing so beautifully. They are making them so proud. This one has the perfect job. This one, it looks so thin. This one looks so beautiful. Friends, I'm here to tell you, nobody is having the most marvelous, most wonderful of times. We are all struggling. And that is the soul. We are in this world to be agitated and to agitate, to go through times that are not simple. And it's actually those times that we have to remember two things. One, our own self-esteem. I'm having a hard time. Let's not deprecate ourselves. Let's not say, oh, I can't do this. Everything is so difficult for me. I'm not worthy. I'm incapable. No, friends, let's remind ourselves Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem. We have a soul. Let's realize that we are endowed and we are capable. And then when we look at others, let us not look at them and saying, they're having such an easy time. No, they too are precious souls. They too are souls that are here on a journey in this world and not always having the easiest of times. We may not be seeing it, but perhaps when we look at the other, we need to be reminded of that as I have a soul and they have a soul, and our souls were sent here on earth as Abraham to be on a journey, to leave a place of comfort, to push ourselves to places of perhaps discomfort in order to grow our souls. So is our fellow human. And let us perhaps keep that in mind. And, as we approach Passover and Pesach, there's a lot of tension in the getting ready and in the celebration, not to mention the managing of family. It's a wonderful time to remember that we must indeed honor our fellow human being, honor our fellow people, and some of them are even family members, and move from that to a place of deep appreciation, not only of our own souls, but the souls of all of our fellow humans.
Thank you. So I know this was very apropos for me, and I think probably for a lot of people. There are two questions that I'll pose, and hopefully, there are difficult questions to answer in an hour or a week, but you have a minute, so you'll do the best. Lisa Goodman asked, in a very concrete way, what would be one small practice you would suggest for cultivating the midah of kavod? And you may have mentioned some of this, but if you can.
Okay, so I think what has worked for me is taking a deep breath. And ironically, that is the soul, that is the spirit. We are all in a huge rush. Alan talks about this. We all know we're in a big rush. And when we're standing in that line, whether it's for coffee, I think this happens a lot in Seattle. I honestly think it's so deeply important to take a deep breath and look at the person that's helping us. And actually, I think my daughter's listening to this webinar, and she reminded me a while ago of something that happened when she was a child, which I had totally forgotten. And it meant a lot to me when she reminded me of this. It seemed that we had been in a supermarket, and that one of the children had been very short with the person who was helping us and adding up our grocery order. And she remembered that I had pulled her aside and said, "Sweetheart, you have to remember that this is a person, and we have to honor every person. We have to go back to that person and say, I'm sorry. We have to go to that person and say, how are you? We have to look at that person and not only think about how they're going to be adding up our grocery order or helping us in the department store. We have to deeply really have part of our practice to take a deep breath and say, good morning, and look at them in their face. Have them, that moment when you connect with someone by looking in their eyes and looking in their face, and they're rushing and they're filling the order. But when we take a look at them and say, good morning, how are you? And we look at them, they know that we've appreciated them. And so I think a very important practice is that for all of the people we come across during the day, even at work, when we need something quickly from a colleague, I need the report immediately, to take a breath. Good morning, how was your weekend? Tell me about it. Inside I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't want to hear about the weekend. I want to get my report. But to actually discipline oneself, to deeply care and to say, good morning, how are you? How was your weekend? Tell me about your family. Even though I really want that report, but that the notion of honoring that person is that they're not just there to give me that report. They too are a soul on a journey.
Wonderful. And a final, the big question from Larry, how does one honor terrorists or Hitler or Stalin and many more? Are these just aberrations?
Well, in 30 seconds, I think that is a very complicated question. And I think that I would urge you to read the book by Deborah Lipstadt, Eichmann in Jerusalem, and to read through her book. And I think what's very important, and Alan talks about this a little bit, when we talk about honoring and we talk about midot, we are talking about, to a certain degree, healthy persona. When, someone comes to hurt us, there are still laws about how we deal with them. This is very important. You know what? I'm going to go into this with Pesach for a moment. Rabbi Soloveitchik tells the following. The night of the plague of the firstborn, the Jewish people offered the Paschal sacrifice and were told to stay in their homes. Lock yourself in the house. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says, don't go out. It would be normal for slaves to rebel. It would be normal for there to be rioting. It would be normal for there to be looting. It would be something expected in the history of the world for terrible degradation of women. But God says, stay in your home. I will go and take care of the Egyptians who have persecuted you. You might want their belongings. Go and knock on the door and ask for them. Let them hand it to you. Can you imagine that moment when the Israelite slave knocks on the door and says, I've been working for you for many years. Can I have some of your gold and silver? Asking for the reparation, asking one human being, eye to eye, face to face. God says, stay in your house. For the possessions, knock on the door. But that night, when there's a plague of the firstborns, you stay in your house. And we, my friend, when we have a person who has been murdered by a terrorist, we write on their gravestone, Hashem yikom damam. God will avenge their blood. We are the Jewish people. We are the Jewish people. We stay in our homes. The last night we're in Egypt. We don't go and loot and rape and steal and pillage. We ask. And then we stay inside and we don't harm anyone. And we say, Hashem yikom damam. God will take revenge. We are the army of the state of Israel, is the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. We are the people of God here on earth, and even when it comes to our most heinous enemies, we do indeed treat them with kavod. One of the ramifications of kavod habriot, of the honor of the human, is that after someone is executed, their body must be taken down and buried. It cannot stay up. So even the human being who treats us in the most horrible way, they are created in the image, we are created in the image, and we must do what is right.
Thank you. Very powerful words. And I think that brings us to an end of today's webinar. We went a little over time, but I think it was well worth it. We didn't lose anybody in that extra time. So I know it was well worth it and very, very much appreciated, Rivy. I would like to thank you, Rivy, for today's webinar. It was very informative and, like I said, pretty passionate and very needed, I'm sure, by many people, and especially in today's world. So I thank you. I wish to thank everybody on the webinar today for being here. You will receive a link to it sometime tomorrow. Please feel free to share that, as I said, with everybody that you wish. And since we're just a very short time away, I wish everybody a meaningful, healthy, happy, kosher Pesach. I hope it's wonderful with friends and family and very meaningful. We'll continue our webinar series after Pesach. Look for more advertisements for that coming up. And everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you, Rivy. You have a wonderful day out in Seattle.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.